Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of JDM Masters car reviews. And today we have a Toyota Supra RZ, codenamed JZA80, and this belongs to a friend of mine. This is one of the most iconic JDM cars in the super touring category, well loved by everyone who loves Gran Turismo, a lot of different games, and of course you've seen this in many option magazines. So those of you in America will probably relate this car to a lot of tuning, but today we're going to look at a different aspect, at the true design philosophy of this car. So come join us. Now, to understand what is makings of this car, JZA80, let's have a look at the Toyota nomenclature first of all. Toyota always uses the engine codes at the beginning of their chassis code. So JZ meaning it's a JZ series, 1JZ, a 2JZ, obviously in this case of the Supra, it's a 2JZ 3-liter inline 6. The actual model code is the A and the 80. So you have the previous versions, A60 from the Celica Supra, and then the first true Supra, A70, A80 for this one, and of course now the new BMW Supra, which is the A90. In Japan, it's often referred to as Hachimaru Supra. Hachimaru means 8080 Supra. So in America, you probably call it Mark III, Mark IV. Many people call it different ways, but that's just a little bit about how people refer to it. So we are in Yokohama Bay, outside of the very iconic Daikoku Futo parking area, which a lot of car enthusiasts gather. And it's a nice day. We're just by the bayside. The cruise ship, which usually comes around here, troubled times. But anyway, we're here to do a car review. Now, the Toyota Supra is the flagship sports car of Toyota. And this being at the highest grade, obviously in that 80s and 90s, there was no other sports car that was higher than the Supra. So let's go back into history of what the origins of the Supra is. Now, the Toyota Supra is often mistaken to be on its own line. Of course, for those of you who know about the history of the Celica, which originally was a rear-wheel drive front-engine car from the very first TA22, and then going all the way up to the A60. And that time in Japan, they called it the Celica Supra. So the Supra name was actually attached to the Celica name, and what made this was they extended the bonnet line of the Celica to be able to fit a large inline 6 engine. And then after that, for the A70, it sort of split off, separating the Celica, because the Celica became a front-wheel drive car, which then evolved into the Celica GT4. Then the Supra became a more touring, grand touring-based sports car, to the A80 and also now to the A90. However, looking at the body lines and the shape, the actual great-grandfather of the Supra is, surprise, surprise, the 2000 GT. Some of you might know the 2000 GT, which we have in this video over here at the Mega Web, was Toyota's first true foray into the premium luxury sports car market. Before that, they only had the Toyota Sports 800, which is not really like, a sports car that could challenge with the Europeans. So when they made the 2000 GT, beautifully designed, long bonnet, curvy windscreen, and slope aerodeck back, that was basically the design concept that the designers at Toyota wanted, coming from the very boxy A70 design into the A80. A lot of the design concepts was based on designs with the help of the California design studio called Kelty in America, and also with the Japanese design. So let's have a look at this really beautiful body lines. It starts from the back, curved, sloped, raked, smooth rear windscreen, following these nice angled curves from the roofline, sloping down at a steeper angle onto this long bonnet. It just gives this proportions of a really classic tourer, something you'll probably find in cars like the Aston Martin, Ferrari, long tourer, but this being also very Japanese, it has those more shorter proportions. So the basis of the A80 or Mark IV Supra is actually based on the Z30 Sora platform. It has the same floor pan, the double wishbone front and rear suspension, and even many parts of the underpinning. The Sora was classified as a luxury touring sports car, and the Supra is more of a pure sports. In fact, the tagline when the car came out in 1993 was the sports of Toyota. So obviously Toyota meant this to be a top-level sports car that could compete with the likes of Ferrari and Porsche. So the difference between the Z30 Supra and the Supra mainly are the overall length. Supra has almost 4.8 meters in total length, and the Supra is at 4.5 meters. This is actually a little bit shorter than the previous A70 Supra. Having a shorter wheelbase gives agility. Now, it's quite a deceptive looking car, because in the flesh, the Supra is low and wide, and it gives an impression that it's really long. But with that kind of wheelbase, 2,500, now, that's actually shorter than an Integra Type R, DC2 or EK9. It's actually not too much longer than the Lancer Evolution 1-6 series, but it has the advantage of having a very wide rear track. So something about car dynamics, the ideal sort of wheelbase to track, you'll see this sometimes in Formula cars, is the track should be roughly half of the wheelbase. Of course, it's quite unrealistic to achieve that in a road-going car. But if you look at the proportions of the Supra, this is what gives it its agility. In fact, this wheelbase is actually shorter than the Skyline GTR. So the characteristics of this car, which we will do on a comparison video, is what gives it its distinct character. So in addition, it has really good proportions of a relatively short front overhang for this type of Grand Tourer car, the shorter wheelbase, and at the back you also have a very short overhang, giving it a very deceptively compact look. So some of the key differences between the Z30 Supra and the A80 Supra is actually the location of the fuel tank. In the Supra, the fuel tank is located in the normal position underneath the rear seats, but with the shorter Supra, they've actually relocated the fuel tank to under the trunk space. You can see it right here, metal fuel tank. Now the reason for doing this is very simple. It's to optimize weight distribution in the more sportier designated Supra. So having the fuel tank with a full gas tank, imagine this sitting behind the rear wheels, actually helps to give it more traction. Now this is kind of admittingly a bit different concept to a lot of other cars. For example, the Altezza has all of the weight towards the center. But then we're talking about a high-powered, high-torque car with a relatively short wheelbase. So this is what the lengths that the Toyota engineers have actually done to make this. And this is, we're talking about 1993. And we're going to talk about a lot of interesting technologies that were introduced at that time. There was a huge change over the A70 Supra. Now the A80 Supra is arguably one of the most beautifully designed bodies and shapes from the 1990s. I think probably, in my opinion, and perhaps maybe shared by a lot of people, only the FD3S RX-7 would maybe top this. But let's look at this beautiful curves. And can you imagine, this was coming from a very boxy A70 into curvy line in 1993. Of course, thanks to the Kelty design. So let's have a look at some of the details. With these muscular bulging fenders, if you look from the side, it's not flat, it curves out, giving these muscular bulges. And the side mirrors are actually mounted on the body and going down, gentle crease on the doors and going to the front. It bulges out again and down, curving into the headlights, which viewed from the top is very, very reminiscent of some Aston Martins of the 90s. So a lot of design concepts were used on this Toyota Supra, and nothing like it at all. I mean, the Toyota Supra, which was based on, was a much more orthodox kind of like a big square, like it's curved, but there's much more curves to this. And it's one of the reasons why this design could last in Japan from 1993 all the way up to 2002. So the export market unfortunately didn't get such a long lifespan of the Supra. But the JDM Supra was sold until 2002 and with a better engine in 1997. So actually 3 different versions of this. Some of the design concepts that the engineers wanted to do with the A80 was in weight reduction. Now, the A70 weighed a hefty 1,500 kilograms. The lightest version of the RZ with the 6-speed manual, when it first came out, was a very light 1,410. That's 90 kilograms lighter. Now, how did they do this? Obviously, a smaller, shorter body, but also the extensive use of kind of exotic materials before using carbon fiber. Aluminium was very, very popular to save weight. So one of the key areas they used it was in the bonnet. All the rest was steel panels. Now the first version used a aluminium roof, but this one here is it only has the aluminium bonnet. So I've got a little magnet here, and we're going to test whether it's genuinely steel or aluminium. So it's just a soft one, so don't worry. It is steel, it sticks here, and this doesn't stick at all, aluminium. The roof here is steel. Oh, it sticks really hard. So, and other areas that they use aluminium was in the front crash bar reinforcement beam was also aluminium, as well as other key parts inside the body structure. Obviously, in a sports car, you want as less weight as possible. So removing 90 kilograms compared to the previous version is really what changed the character in the handling of the A80. The very first 1993 JDM version had an aero front spoiler, which was electronically operated. Later versions, they actually removed it, plus a lot of other equipment. Maybe it's just to simplify the car, or it wasn't really popular. So Dylan's car is modified with a turbo. It's changed from a twin turbo to a single setup, and to fit that, he's also got a different, much larger intercooler, and we're going to check out later the details. But all these openings here are very, very important, obviously, in a turbocharged car, to get as much air as possible into the intercooler or into the radiator. Now, you notice how it has no grille, which is quite common in cars of the 80s and 90s, in order to create better aerodynamics, to cut coefficient drag. So this is one of the key points of this long bonnet coming from here onto that sloping roof line. Now, Toyota engineers were very, very determined that the new A80 had to withstand at stable speeds over 250 kilometers. Now that was something that was unheard of for Japanese cars, thinking that, so from the late 80s to be released in the 90s, that was the design concept. Can you imagine this sort of design? They were actually going up against the European supercars with this. The technical capabilities of the A80 Supra, a lightweight body with high rigidity, superior aerodynamics, and a strong tunable engine, was one of the points was why it was favored by aftermarket tuners to bring it to high horsepower to achieve high speeds that could be used on the Yatabe circuit and also in street racing. A very famous team who would do 300-kilometer runs down the Wangan. Actually, this was their favorite car for its superior aerodynamics. It could go against Porsche 911 turbos. It was even rated higher than the Skyline GTR, very much because of the aerodynamics. Now, Dylan's car has the 4-port calipers from the later version RZ, which was also the same standard equipment on the turbo models from the US models. And what actually happened was that they brought the US spec parts into the JDM version of the 1994. These brakes were very impressive back in the day. The braking distances that this Supra achieved with weight balance and these big 4-port caliper brakes was not beaten until the later 90s. So it really had a lot of really good spec, even for a car designed in the early 90s. So Dylan, thanks for letting us try your
Mark IV.
Mark IV.
Yeah.
Why do you think Americans call it using the Mark system?
You know, I'm not actually sure why they use that system, but they do it for all of them because they call the originals the Mark I, even though it was a Celica Supra.
Right.
Same thing, the Mark II, the Mark III, now the Mark IV, and then now with the new Supra, the 2020 Supra.
Is that the Mark V?
That's the Mark V, yeah.
Okay.
Part of it, I think, was some of the websites and YouTube from back in the day, for whatever reason, decided to use those terms, and I think it kind of just stuck with Americans.
Right. Why the Mark IV Supra for you?
Well, I mean, it really is a good blend of everything that I want in a car. It's reliable. It's got that 90s Toyota reliability. It can make pretty serious amounts of power with very minimal modifications.
Right.
And it also just is the looks. The looks are just so so classic for the time, even though it was a car that was built 27 years ago now. I think it really just looks good in almost any setting, and you don't need to do a whole lot to it to look good. It looks very good in factory form.
That is true. I know that there are a lot of Supra fans and owners who go through a lot of effort to try and put various body kits, especially made popular by Fast and Furious series, or like, you know, Bomax, or like in Japan, Veilside, or Avlog.
Rocket Bunny.
Rocket Bunny, well, that's like a more modern thing, right? But I really appreciate the natural smooth curves of the stock body. You know, putting a body kit, it's cool, but it kind of squares out that nice roundedness. What do you think?
Agreed. And that's a big reason. I love the TRD wing, don't get me wrong, but a big reason why I kept the factory wing is because I like the rounded look.
Right.
And the lines just look very clean as they are. The only thing I've done to the outside is the wheels, and I mean, everybody's got the wheels in their car, and it's a very subtle front lip.
Now it's aluminum billet, so of course it is really, really light. Now let's have a look at the engine of the A80 Supra. It's got a 2JZ engine, which is very famous now, of course, with people who know this car and for tuners. But let's talk a little bit about the history. The JZ series debuted in the A70 Supra as a 2.5 litre 1JZ. When the A80 Supra, they upgraded this to a 3 litre using the same base internals, but just increasing the stroke. Now the only other JDM car that has the 2JZ GTE twin turbo is the JZS 161 Aristo. And so this was also pretty interesting because the Aristo was marketed as a Lexus GS outside of Japan, never got the twin turbo GTE engine. Now a little bit about the background of the JZ engine. Avid Toyota fans will know that all of Toyota's sports engines, and in fact some luxury car engines, were actually co-designed, in fact completely engineered by Yamaha, which has a long history in motorcycle racing. And this goes back all the way to the 2000 GT. Yamaha has been commissioned by Toyota to engineer the whole engine, starting from the crankshaft to the cylinder head, the flow, and just how it works. Of course, the base components comes from Toyota's range of engines, but to make the sports engines, Yamaha had a lot of hands in famous engines like the 4AGE, the 3SGE. But so the 1JZ was actually fully designed by Yamaha, and which you can see in this reference photo, there's the word Yamaha on the front. However, there's been a lot of rumors, but most believe that the 2JZ was not commissioned out to Yamaha. Now, I believe the reason is very, very simple. The only difference between the 1JZ and the 2JZ is capacity, and this is a matter of stroke. All of the other internal components, including the valve head, were very similar. So it could be that since Yamaha had already designed the base engine, Toyota didn't need to pay Yamaha an additional amount of money to make a stroked up 3 litre version, that they could do it themselves internally. So that's one reason why there was never any word Yamaha written on the cam cover. Talking a little bit about the technology, and you can see here ETCS standing for Electronic Throttle Control System. This was the first generation of electronic throttles, but it's not really. Let's have a look closely. On this side, you can see the conventional cable controlled throttle, and over here, you can see 2 motors, actually, and a sensor that controls 2 butterfly valves inside. Now, the purpose of this was to be used for early traction control systems, but also it controls of the different airflow, and this is coming up from the early TVIS system used in the early AE86s. So it's more complicated by today's standards, obviously, but cutting edge technology from the bubble economy era, spending a lot of money on research, as we've seen with the body and the suspension design. But this is reputed to be perhaps maybe the strongest JDM engine, obvious from the tuning industry in which was the golden era. You can see from fantastic tuned cars like made by Veilside and Avlog and a lot of other Japanese tuners, how they could achieve 500, 600 horsepower. Now, obviously today we see a lot of 1,000 horsepower American built cars on the internet, but back in the 90s, achieving a reliable 550 horsepower. You can see from this reference video. It was a fantastic feat. Now the reason is the 2JZ engine could take a lot of abuse or a lot of additional power without even changing a lot of these internals. So Dylan's car has a big single turbo, which I'll let him talk about it in a while. The original 2JZ GTE came with a twin turbo system. Now on the cam cover it says yes, two-way twin turbo. Old Japanese English, but really what this is a sequential system. So I'll explain a little bit about the sequential system. Have a look at the twin turbocharger system set up on the 2JZ GTE stock version. Two-way twin turbo as it's called by Toyota. Here are the two turbos which are the same size, and for the JDM version the turbine wheel is made of ceramic for lightweight and better response compared to the US steel versions. So you have here the two turbos connected to the turbine outlet elbow, which you can see in the diagram here. You have the two turbos, and for the low speed range only one of them is activated. As you can see from the stream here, air cleaner takes air, goes into one. Now both run at the same time, but there is actually an actuator that cuts flow from the second turbo, which comes online at a certain RPM and boost. And you can see here how the flow goes into both and is fed through the intercooler back into the engine. So let's have a look at the layout placement inside the engine bay. You have a long 6-cylinder block, but it's placed as far back as possible into the firewall. And let's have a look at the front of the engine. And you take this line and it's well inside the wheel well housing cover. A lot of purist sports cars tend to come with 50-50 weight distribution, but if you want to build a top speed power car, you need more traction in the front. So the Supra has a more ideal 52 to 53% of weight distribution in the front, and this was already better than the Skyline GTR, but of course it's two different cars with two different concepts, but a big improvement of the weight distribution compared to the A70. You have a lot of the components like the ABS situated down here, even though the battery is here, but it's already like a lot of the weight with all of the accessories were located inside the wheel well. And another point is that the JZ series engines are actually lighter than the RB series. Supra has a double wishbone suspension front and rear. As you can see, the top mount is located a bit further inside. Now, double wishbone suspensions are always preferred for superior handling in car engineering and dynamics. Now, the reason is double wishbones can hold a better camber and road holding as it goes into the corner, as the geometry starts to shift. But the biggest difference of the double wishbone suspension used in the Supra is that it's a low mounted in-wheel system. So you got the upper arms, which was made of aluminium also to save weight over the previous version, and the lower arms located inside the wheel well, as you can see from the reference video here. This is very different from the Nissan double wishbone suspensions, which had a high mount type, usually typically found on front-wheel drive cars like the Honda DC, EG, EK, and Accords and Preludes, and also on certain Mazda Atenzas. Because it is a rear-wheel drive, having this system with the rear complicated multi-link double wishbone suspension was also one of the secrets why it had such great stability even for a relatively heavy car. So I've driven stock twin-turbo JZ80 before on the mountains of Hakone, and I was really genuinely surprised by how agile it is with something relatively big. The turning feels a lot like an RX-7 FD and also a Mazda MX-5 Roadster, which also has the same kind of design, double wishbone suspensions in-wheel type versus the high mount type. So the steering characteristics for something of this size was really impressive. How, you know, it had a lot of torque, but we can see that Toyota engineers really put a lot of effort. Actually, the 70 Supra already had this sort of double wishbone suspension, but in the A80 it was made a lot lighter by more use of lightweight components. Now all this A80 Supra is really not just individual parts, but the car is a sum of the total number of components put together, which maybe a lot of people might not realize that it actually handles really well. And it's not just, you know, an oversteer maniac car with a lot of torque and used a lot of straight line and for high speed. So it was a car that at a high level for a top level manufacturer like Toyota that could do a lot of things. And with the right suspension setup and good geometry, good tires, even on the circuit, really interesting car to drive. All right, so let's crank the engine up and hear the sound. Ooh, that is smooth. That is smooth. Now, one of the advantages of the engineers using an inline-6 engine is preferred for its smoothness. An inline-4 inherently has a lot of secondary vibration because of the different positions of the pistons. An inline-6 engine actually has the pistons on the first bank and the sixth and the last bank going in the same direction, which cancels out vibrations, making it silky smooth. If we compare with a lot of other engine configurations that is possible, perhaps I would say the inline-6 is perhaps the smoothest. The next would be you've got to go double. It's a V12. V8s, V10s, they all have their own characteristics, but inline 6s are still much smoother than V6s, which contributes to the power delivery characteristics of such engines. It's a pity that no Japanese manufacturer makes inline 6s again, but Toyota really wanting to keep that flavor is one of the reasons why they commissioned BMW to make the A90 Supra, which is the only manufacturer left that produces inline 6 engines. So just listen to this. Let's listen to the exhaust sound now. Aftermarket exhaust, so it should enunciate the natural sound of the 2JZ GTE. Let's go! Woo! Now, probably not a good idea to stand near the exhaust, we get all that fumes, but the point is that inline 6 engine delivers this silky smooth sound. Like, you've got the big turbo set. What's the compressor size?
So this is a 64 millimeter. It's a precision 6466 1.0 AR.
Oh,
so
that's
for a Supra, I would say that's small.
It's small, right, right.
I would call it, the Supra community, I would call that a small single. Probably a more accurate term would be a medium size. It's not a tiny turbo, but it's not your, 7670 or one of the T78 or any of these really crazy massive turbos.
Did you choose that mainly for response?
Exactly. So I think that there's always somebody that has a faster car. There's always somebody that has a more horsepower than you. But
Yeah.
What I really wanted was a street car that is fun to drive. I could daily it. It has actually been my daily for the last 5 years.
Wow.
And then
5 years.
I've had it for 5 years. It's never broke down on me.
That's Toyota quality.
Even at this power level. It's reliable. It's very responsive in the mid-range. Like if you punched it right now, it would spool pretty quickly. You wouldn't have to do a whole lot. Yeah, go for it.
That is fast. That is fast.
We're only giving it partial throttle too.
I'm afraid to unleash all 600 horsepower in the daytime in this but I get the idea.
Yeah, so you only did 1 bar there.
Oh. That's being a wimp now.
Just 1 bar.
Just 1 bar. So we're in the car. Let's have a look at this really almost fighter cockpit-like interior. The design concept of the A80 Supra was that all of the controls would be situated around the driver. So I'm gonna shift myself into normal driving position I would for this car. What's interesting from my point of view is the top of the dashboard line is actually pretty flat. The dashboard is sort of low mounted height and integrates everything. So you have the center mounted tachometer, speedometer on this side, big fuel and water temperature gauges in your usual positions, located in nice circular cutouts, which, for the early 90s, this was something quite unique. The aircon vents are also circular on this side. Dylan has replaced the original digital clock with a modern meter, which, let's have a look. It can show boost, in PSI or in peak boost, and it's also an air fuel ratio meter down here and a wideband sensor. Very, very nice addition. He said he didn't want to put a lot of meters on the car. Usually people just put it around this side. This is a very minimalistic design using a space occupied by a stock meter just to keep it very simple looking. And now another point about just sitting in this cockpit. A car with good ergonomics means you have a very stress-free driving environment. You're able to reach all these controls. So you have the aircon temperature here, the aircon fan speed, the button and the handbrake and the gear shift without stretching your arms. And this is good ergonomics design. However, admittingly, you know, the passenger doesn't really need to see all these things. But I don't think there's another car or a JDM car designed quite like this, quite extreme, and just like, it was clearly a design ahead of its time. The side panel here, just the way the dashboard design starts from the controls of the windows, and it goes out like an A arch coming over here, ending in the gear shift and the handbrake lever. And let's have a look. So we have, this is an ashtray with coins inside, and at least a convenient little box, enough cubby space. Now rear seats, well, they're not gonna fit an adult, obviously, or even a child. But who buys a Supra to carry rear passengers anyway, isn't it? This is a very driver-centered cockpit, and I must say it's more extreme than other designs. In fact, a lot of 90s sports cars were sort of like aiming towards that kind of like maybe driver-centric. You can even see it in like the FD RX-7. You can see it in the normal Lancers, where like it's got a little curve, the Celica. A lot of cars had this sort of design, but seriously, none as extreme as the A80 Supra. Now over here on the early Zenki version, without the airbags, there are actually two compartments, a normal glove box and a storage tray. Now what I like about Dylan's car is that he still retained the stock 1993 era cassette player. So here we can see the button for the operation of the electronically controlled spoiler, which of course is removed on this car. So here down, nothing happens if I press here because there's no more spoiler, but the buttons were still kept. Early traction control off, which they didn't say TCS, they said slip. Okay, let's talk about the gearbox. So this is a 6-speed gearbox, but it's actually developed in cooperation with a German company called Getrag. Now Getrag also produces the same gearbox, but later for the R34 GTR. They're actually the same gearbox, but there's some little differences in order to fit the GTR's transfer case. But on the Supra, this was the first Japanese car to use a 6-speed gearbox in, you know, for a performance car. Mitsubishi GTO 3000 GT also had a 6-speed Getrag gearbox, but that was a transverse mounted. Getrag boxes in JDM cars, yeah, was the 80 Supra, the R34 GTR, the 3000 GT, and the Lancer Evolution 10 5-speed, and also the Colt Ralliart. I'm not sure if there are any other cars that use the Getrag gearbox. What's really complicated about this Getrag gearbox is that it uses very little transmission fluid. It's not actually normal gear oil. It's 2 liters of a kind of ATF. It's a special fluid that only could be gotten from the manufacturer at a very high cost. Now let's have a look at these seats. Now the normal Supras come with a Toyota-made bucket seat, but what Dylan has here is the SR3 Recaros with the Le Mans pattern, still very popular for collectors who want this seat. Now the interesting thing is that this is the same model as the optional seats for the 80 Supra, but this is not actually the optional seat, and the reason is it's over here. Seatbelt feeders are made of plastic. The original optional seats actually had a kind of like Alcantara suede covering, so those are really, really rare.
Hi, my name is Dylan. This is my 1993 JDM Toyota Supra RZ, and I want to give a special thanks to JDM Masters for having me on the channel today. I moved to Japan originally in December of 2014, and about 6 months of searching for cars, I eventually stumbled upon this 1993 Toyota Supra. I didn't originally want a Supra, actually. When I first got here, I was looking for an R32 GTR, and I went and test drove a couple, and I really did like them. But this one happened to pop up for sale as I was at a dealership looking at an R32 GTR, and I went and had a test drive, and it just spoke to me. I really enjoyed both cars. I love anything 90s that's around. I like all the cars that are here, but this one is definitely my favorite, and that's why I bought one. Car, when I bought it in 2015, had 103,000 kilometers, which is about 64,000 miles. It was almost completely stock. It had these work wheels, it had a catback exhaust, and it had the front mount intercooler, and otherwise it was completely factory. Aesthetically speaking, the only things I've changed on the car are the front lip. I put Koki headlights in, which is the second generation headlights. I changed the taillights to second generation taillights, and then I changed the factory cloth seats to the Recaro Le Mans confetti seats. Aesthetically speaking, those are the only things that I've changed on the car. I really prefer a very OEM looking car. To me, that's just what speaks to me. I do like body kits, and some people like the TRD wing, but I actually just like the factory style. As far as power, first thing I did to this car is it came with the non-turbo brakes. The early Japanese models had the smaller front brakes, so I immediately went and put the twin turbo brakes that most cars in America come with, and then I changed over the turbo. I went single turbo. It has a Precision 6466 ball bearing turbo, which in the Supra world is probably a bit on the small side, but I wanted a street car. I didn't want to have a car that makes too much power that you can have fun with. I wanted a car that I can do lots of pulls with on the street and enjoy in day-to-day life. This car is actually my daily driver for now. In a month when I move back to the United States, it's going to be more of a weekend car, but for the last 5 years, it's actually been my daily driver. So I needed something that was reliable. I needed something that I could still get to work with every day, but I wanted to have fun. That's why I picked the Supra. The 2Js are just known to have bulletproof reliability, even when you add a significant amount of power over stock, as long as you do the maintenance on them, and that's something that I spent a lot of time doing. I didn't actually single turbo the car until 2018, 2.5 years after I bought it. The first 2.5 years I spent replacing the timing, doing the valve stem steels, doing the basic maintenance that you really are looking for on a car before you add power. I made sure all of that was in check, did compression tests, made sure everything checked out before adding power. Just want to say a very special thank you to JDM Masters for having me on the channel today. Thank you very much.
So guys, that was our review of this JZA70. No, it's not. So alright guys, that was a review of the JZA80 Supra.
JZA80 Supra.
Mark IV, right. And I hope you enjoyed it. So let us know in the comments what you think of this car. And thank you, Dylan, for coming out and letting us try your car.
I appreciate it.
And follow his Instagram account right here for builds and future stuff. Catch you guys in our next video, and peace out.